At my daughter's wedding party, I gave my name, but the staff said, "Sorry, sir, you're not on the guest list." I asked my daughter, and her response was, "Sorry, Dad, the party is only for my lovers." I left calmly. What happened next shocked everyone. I will tell you how it unfolded. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Robert Green from Atlanta. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I always knew I'd cry at my daughter's wedding. I just never thought the tears would be from shame. The morning of the ceremony, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, fumbling with my tie. It had been years since I'd worn anything but slacks and polos, my accountant uniform, and I'd forgotten how to work the damn knot. Eventually, I gave up and pulled out the clip-on I'd stashed in my sock drawer, a quiet compromise between pride and practicality. The suit felt stiff on my shoulders, like I was wearing someone else's life, but I figured it would all be worth it once I saw her walk down the aisle. Sienna, my little girl. She used to hold my hand with both of hers whenever we crossed the street. She used to fall asleep on my chest during movie nights. I remembered how she used to draw these crooked pictures of our house with the two of us inside, just her and me. No mom, just Daddy in blue crayon and her in pink. We've been a team for so long, I honestly thought nothing could shake that. She was 5 when her mother left. I won't pretend I didn't see it coming. Beth was always looking out windows, talking about the places she could have gone, the life she might have lived. When she packed up her bags, she didn't even try to hide her relief. But I stayed. I stayed because I couldn't imagine leaving Sienna behind, even for a second. Every decision I made after that, every late night at the office, every skipped vacation, every silent birthday I spent eating takeout alone, it was for her. And now, it was her big day. The ceremony itself was beautiful. White chairs, lilac petals lining the aisle, string quartet playing something I didn't recognize but felt classy. I wasn't asked to walk her down the aisle. That honor went to her future father-in-law, which stung a bit, but I told myself it was fine. It was her day, not mine. I sat quietly in the second row, smiled when I was supposed to, even laughed during Ethan's vows, though I found them oddly generic. The trouble started after the ceremony. The guests were ushered onto shuttle buses to head to the reception venue, a private estate outside the city. I followed the crowd, assuming my name would be on the guest list. Of course it would be. I was her father. When I reached the gate, a young woman with a headset and an iPad smiled at me. "Name, please." "Mark Ellis," I said, already spotting a familiar uncle waving me over from the entrance. She tapped her screen, frowned slightly, and asked again, "Could it be under another name?" "No," I said, my voice tightening. "Mark Ellis. I'm the bride's father." She checked again, then glanced at her earpiece. "I'm really sorry, sir. Your name's not on the list." I laughed. I actually laughed, thinking it was some mix-up. Maybe they had me under Dad, or maybe Sienna had forgotten to finalize the guest list. It's okay. Just call her. She'll clear it up. A few minutes later, Sienna appeared at the gate. She looked radiant in her gown, her veil pulled back, the makeup around her eyes still perfectly intact. She walked up, smiling, but not like someone who'd forgotten a name. She looked prepared. "Hey, Dad," she said gently. "The list," I said. "They said I'm not on it." She paused. That's when I felt the shift. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't surprised. "I know," she said. "The reception it's kind of private. Just my lovers." I blinked. "You're what?" "My inner circle," she clarified quickly. "People I feel closest to." I didn't want to make things complicated. "Complicated?" I said, my voice rising slightly. I could feel the blood rushing to my ears. I just wanted to keep it simple. You were at the ceremony. That was the important part. She was already stepping back as she spoke, her eyes darting nervously behind me. I followed her gaze. Someone else needed her attention. Someone more important. I nodded slowly. "Right," I said, swallowing the tightness in my throat. "Well, congratulations." And I turned around. I walked back to my car in total silence. Not anger, not yet. Just a numb, hollow sort of disbelief. The kind you feel when your house burns down and you're standing there in your pajamas watching the flames eat through your roof. Something foundational had collapsed, and all I could do was watch. At home, I poured myself a whiskey neat, no ice, and stared at the envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside were the printed confirmations for the honeymoon I had paid for. Luxury hotel in Bali, airport transfers, spa vouchers, a candlelight dinner on the beach. 5-star, all-inclusive. I'd booked it as a surprise, hoping they'd think of me fondly while sipping coconut drinks in paradise. But suddenly, that gift felt grotesque. A reward for disrespect. I sat in silence for a long time, the glass untouched in my hand. Then, just before midnight, I pulled out my laptop. I logged into the travel site, found the bookings, and left them untouched for now. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But something inside me had shifted. This wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity. And I was done handing mine over for free. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I just lay there on the couch, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling while the silence swelled around me. It was strange. The house, once a place of comfort, suddenly felt like a museum of my mistakes. Every framed photo, every piece of mismatched furniture that I'd held onto for years, they all whispered, "You did this for her." And now she'd left me standing outside a gate like a stranger trying to sneak into someone else's happiness. I told myself to let it go. That was the mature thing, right? Just move on. Chalk it up to wedding stress or some weird millennial curated guest list trend I didn't understand. But the more I replayed it in my mind, her tone, her avoidance, the practiced lines, the more I realized it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. The next morning, my phone lit up with a picture posted to social media, Sienna on Ethan's shoulders at the reception, surrounded by her lovers, arms raised, champagne spraying. I stared at it for a long time. There was no anger in me, just the stoic, like I was watching a movie where I used to be the lead, and now I was barely an extra. By noon, she texted, "Hey Dad, just checking in. Sorry again about the guest list thing. Hope you got home safe." Sorry again, like she'd accidentally spilled wine on my tie. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what to say that wouldn't come out bitter. And truthfully, I didn't want to be bitter. I just wanted to be seen, acknowledged for the role I'd played, the weight I'd carried. Around 5 p.m., I finally called. She picked up on the second ring, chipper and breathless, like she was running between conversations. "Hi, Dad. You have a second?" I asked, flat. "Sure. Just sneaking off for a sec. What's up?" "I want to understand," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Why wasn't I on the guest list?" There was a pause. A long one. I could hear voices in the background, laughter, clinking glasses. "It wasn't personal," she said finally. "I mean, I did not invite you. I was trying to keep it light. You know? Positive energy." "Positive energy," I repeated. "And I don't qualify for that?" "Dad," she said, with that exasperated sigh I'd heard since she was 16. "You get so intense sometimes. You would have asked questions, you would have been uncomfortable, and then I would have felt guilty. I just didn't want that on my wedding night." "Uncomfortable how? You don't exactly love Ethan," she said, voice tight now. "And I didn't want that energy around. Everyone else there supports us. They've been with me through everything." "Through what?" I asked, sharper now. "You make it sound like I abandoned you." She didn't answer. That silence said everything. I felt it all rising in my chest, years of swallowed pride, of being the reliable fallback, the background figure. I paid for the dress, the venue deposit, half the catering, and I was good with that, because I thought I was part of this. Us, like you said. "Dad, stop," she said quickly. "Why are you making this about you?" "Because I'd made everything about her for 25 years. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, "Enjoy your party," and hung up. I stared at the envelope still on the counter, the honeymoon packet, and something in me just hardened. I couldn't justify it anymore. Not the money, not the silence, not the self-erasure. So I waited. 2 days later, they boarded their flight to Bali. I knew because I still had the alerts set up on my account. When the plane took off, I sat at my kitchen table, logged into the travel site, and canceled everything. Hotel, excursions, transfers. I made sure they wouldn't be charged a dime. They just wouldn't have anywhere to go once they landed. I blocked both their numbers right after. It took 13 hours for the first message to come in. Dad, what happened? We're at the airport and there's nothing. No ride. No hotel. Did you cancel the honeymoon? Then, please call me. We're stuck. And finally, I'm begging you. Please don't do this. I didn't reply. I read every one. Let the weight of them settle on me like bricks. Then I poured a glass of water, took it out to the porch, and watched the sun set with a strange kind of peace. They were in paradise and still needed me. And this time, I wasn't going to show up. I used to think silence was a punishment. Back when Sienna was little, maybe 6 or 7, and she'd done something wrong, left the freezer open, cut her hair with safety scissors, flushed her mom's old earrings down the toilet. I'd try to discipline her, never yelling. That wasn't my way. But I'd go quiet, withdraw a little. And that silence? That was what broke her. She'd curl up in my lap and whisper, "Are you mad at me, Daddy?" And I'd always say the same thing. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. It used to mean something. Now, years later, sitting alone in my house while my phone buzzed endlessly, I wondered if silence still had that power. If disappointment could still echo across oceans. They had landed in Bali a few hours ago. I'd watched their flight like someone following a storm, tracking its path, knowing it would hit, but staying just far enough away to avoid getting caught in the damage. I'd made sure the cancellations went through exactly as planned. There were no rooms under their names, no welcome packages, no spa appointments waiting with their initials printed on a card. Just a hot, humid foreign airport and 2 freshly married adults with no plan and no help. The messages came in waves. First from Sienna, then Ethan, then unknown numbers. They tried everything: texts, calls, even social media DMs. I ignored it all. The group chat I'd been in with Sienna and Ethan since the engagement now stood frozen at the top of my phone, unread. The title of the group, Team Sienna Wedding Countdown, felt like a cruel joke. At one point, Ethan left a voicemail. I listened to that one. "Mark, look, I know this is about the reception. And I know Sienna didn't handle it perfectly. But she was trying to keep things chill, you know? You can't hold that against her forever. We're stuck here. I mean, I thought you were better than this." I laughed, out loud. Better than this? I'd paid for the ring quietly, behind the scenes, because Sienna said Ethan was saving for grad school and didn't want to compromise. I'd funded the engagement dinner, the dress alterations, the travel stipends for Beth's side of the family. I hadn't asked for a single thank you. I just wanted to be part of it. Not the star, not the center. Just part of it. But they'd made it clear. I was good enough to foot the bill, but not good enough to be in the photos. The next day, the messages shifted in tone. Less frantic, more cutting. "Sienna, you really think this proves a point? All it proves is you're petty and vindictive. Ethan, I always told Sienna you were controlling. She just didn't want to believe it." I sat with that one for a long time. Controlling. That word rang louder than it should have. It wasn't the first time I'd heard it, not from Ethan, but from Beth, years ago. That I tried too hard to hold things together. That I smothered with structure, responsibility, too many boundaries. But here's what they never saw. I didn't try to control things because I wanted power. I did it because I had to, because no one else would. After Beth left, I became the planner, the nurturer, the one who knew where every Band-Aid and tax return was kept. I built the foundation under our lives brick by brick. If that made me controlling, so be it. But never again would I build for people who saw me as a scaffolding, meant to be invisible. By day 3, I got a call from Sienna's mother. "Mark," Beth said, voice already sharp. "What the hell did you do?" "I gave them a honeymoon," I replied. "They chose not to invite me to the wedding party. I chose not to invite them to paradise. You stranded your daughter. In a foreign country. She has a husband. And plenty of lovers, apparently," I said calmly. "They can figure it out." "You're being cruel," she snapped. "No," I said, and I meant it. "I'm being clear." She hung up. That night, I turned off my phone. Not just airplane mode, off. I didn't want the buzzing, the temptation to check. I didn't want to read one more passive-aggressive plea disguised as moral outrage. Instead, I opened a bottle of red I'd been saving for the wedding toast, the one I never got to give, and sat out back on the patio, watching the wind move through the trees. I thought about how weddings were supposed to bring people together, and in a way, this one had. It had brought me together with a truth I'd avoided for too long. I was done bending. I'd done everything right, by the book, with a full heart, and still ended up shut out of the party. That wasn't a failure. That was clarity. That was them showing me who they were. And I believed them. It didn't take long before the phone calls turned into conversations I couldn't avoid. People started reaching out, some curious, some judgmental, most pretending to be concerned while sniffing around for drama like it was blood in the water. Old family friends, coworkers, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had a reason to get back in touch. "Hey Mark," one friend from college began. "Saw some stuff online. Is everything okay with you in Siena?" My responses stayed short and calm. "Things are complicated. We're working through it." Even though I knew we weren't. Even though I wasn't working toward anything anymore, I was done chasing the illusion that love meant tolerance at any cost. But of course, the story they got wasn't mine. Sienna and Ethan were back from Bali sooner than expected. No surprise. And once they returned, they started laying down their version of the tale. At brunches, on social media, and in quiet conversations meant to sound just honest, they told people how I had humiliated them, how I had weaponized money, how I had always been emotionally distant but controlling, performative generosity, masking deeper issues. The phrase made its way to me via an old colleague of Beth's, who couldn't resist relaying the gossip. Performative generosity, I repeated, the words sour in my mouth like spoiled wine. I wanted to scream, to dig out every email, every receipt, every message that proved otherwise. The hours of dance class payments, the last-minute tuition check when Sienna switched majors and lost her scholarship, the emergency vet bills for the dog she had begged for and then abandoned. But I didn't. Because somewhere deep down, I knew the truth didn't matter to everyone, just to me. And that had to be enough now. Still, there were moments that got under my skin. One afternoon, I ran into Ethan's father, Daniel, at the grocery store. We nodded at each other stiffly, trying to avoid conversation, but we ended up in the same checkout line. Trapped. He leaned over and said, "Lo, I heard what you did." I didn't answer. "She was your daughter," he continued. "You don't turn your back on family like that." I turned to face him. "You mean like when she turned her back on me?" He opened his mouth, then shut it. I nodded and turned back to the conveyor belt, watching cans of soup and cereal boxes roll forward like nothing had happened. But my pulse didn't slow until I was back in my car. Even Beth took her shots. She left a voicemail, furious, sharp, brimming with that old righteous tone she used to wear like perfume. "You're setting a terrible example. You've taught her that love is conditional. Shame on you." Conditional. I almost laughed. Of course love was conditional. Everything healthy in life was. Only the most toxic relationships insisted otherwise. You don't get to exclude someone from a major moment and still expect them to fund your fantasy. Still, her words gnawed at me in the quiet hours, especially late at night. That's when the doubt crept in. Was I overreacting? Should I have just sucked it up? Been the bigger person? But every time I walked back through it in my head, I landed on the same place. No, this wasn't about the reception. It was about the line that had finally been crossed. And for once, I wasn't erasing that line to keep the peace. Then, about a week later, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email. A real letter. It was addressed in Sienna's handwriting, neat and familiar. Inside was a single-page note. Not an apology. Not a plea. Just her version of things. An attempt to explain how she felt pressured by my expectations, how she had started resenting the help because it made her feel small, how she hadn't known how to say no without hurting me, so she said nothing at all. And then this line, "I wish you could understand that sometimes love looks different than what you think it should." I read that sentence 3 times. Then I folded the letter up and placed it in a drawer, not because I wanted to revisit it, but because I needed proof later. Proof that I wasn't crazy. That this wasn't imagined. She'd rewritten the story in her head, not to hurt me, but to protect her version of herself. And I understood that, in a way. But I wasn't going to live inside someone else's fiction anymore. That weekend, I cleaned out the garage, Tossed half the stuff I'd been storing for her since college, old books, outdated clothes, dorm furniture. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a quiet declaration. I was allowed to take up space in my own life again. The funny thing about a lie is how quickly it grows roots. It doesn't need to be outrageous, just believable enough, just close enough to the truth to wear its skin. That's what I realized the day I overheard someone at the office break room say, "You know, I heard Mark disowned his daughter over a party invite." Not a word about the wedding, not a mention of the years, just a party invite. They made it sound like I threw away my only child because of a missing RSVP. I didn't say anything then. Just poured my coffee and walked away. But I felt it tightening inside me, that cord between my ribs, shame and fury twisting together like two snakes. I knew Sienna was hurting. I knew Ethan was probably coaching her through every explanation like it was PR strategy. But I hadn't expected it to travel so far, so fast. And still, I kept my mouth shut. Until I got a message from my niece, Emily. She was young, barely out of college, but sharp, honest, and fiercely loyal. She texted, "Uncle Mark, can I ask something? Sienna's telling people you flipped out and canceled her honeymoon because you hate Ethan. Is that true?" I sat with that for a long moment, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I called her. "Hi, Em," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "No, that's not true. I canceled the honeymoon because I wasn't invited to the reception. I was told, to my face, by my own daughter, that it was only for her lovers." There was a pause. "She said that?" Verbatim. Emily was quiet. Then she sighed. "Jesus, that's not how she tells it at all." "Of course not," I said, the edge creeping into my voice. Because telling it truthfully would require admitting that she didn't want her father present at the most important night of her life. And that doesn't look good on Instagram. That night, I sat down and did something I hadn't done since my college days. I wrote a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A real letter. One I would print and sign and send in an envelope. One she couldn't screenshot and twist out of context. It took me 3 drafts. The final version started simply, "Sienna, I've waited to speak until I could speak without rage. I'm not writing to accuse you, just to answer all the questions you haven't had the courage to ask me directly. Yes, I canceled your honeymoon. Yes, I waited until you landed to do it. And no, it wasn't revenge, it was clarity." I went on, line by line, laying it bare. Not just what happened, but why. How her decision to exclude me was more than a party faux pas. It was a betrayal of the bond one thought we had. How I'd been a silent giver for too long, mistaking sacrifice for love. How every time she erased me from a moment, and still took from me, she taught me how little I mattered in her version of our story. And finally, you can love someone and still hurt them. I know that because I've lived it. But loving someone doesn't mean they owe you silence in return. I will always love you, Sienna. But I will no longer be invisible. I signed it, sealed it, and drove it to the mailbox myself. I didn't expect a response. And none came. But I slept that night, the kind of sleep that feels like a verdict. Of course, the silence didn't last. A week later, Sienna posted a long, cryptic caption with an old photo of the two of us at the beach. Something about learning that not all pain comes from enemies, and how healing means moving on from people who refuse to grow. The comments lit up with sympathy. Friends and followers offering love, calling her brave, assuming I was the villain in the shadows. I stared at that photo. I remembered that day we were eating peanut butter sandwiches on the sand. She was 8. She'd kissed my cheek and told me I was her favorite grown-up in the world. And now, I was a cautionary tale in a neatly filtered slideshow. The hardest part wasn't being misunderstood. It was realizing that she might actually believe her version. That her story of me, as overbearing, punitive, conditional, had become her truth, and nothing I said or did would undo it. But I wasn't writing for her anymore. I was writing for myself. For the man who had spent decades giving without asking, showing up without invitation, and letting himself become a silent foundation. That man was done. It had been nearly 3 months since the wedding. Since the reception that I watched unfold from a parking lot. Since the voicemail pleas from an airport lounge halfway around the world. Since the letter I sent that was never acknowledged, and the public posts that painted me as a villain in someone else's redemption arc. Life didn't exactly return to normal, it just reshaped itself. I found I had more time. more quiet. At first, the silence had felt like abandonment. But over time, it began to feel like peace. I picked up a few new hobbies. Started walking in the mornings. Bought a used bike and took up trail riding on the weekends. I even enrolled in a cooking class at the local community center, Tuesday nights, Italian dishes. I liked the precision of it. The clear steps. No guessing where you stood with a sauce or a stovetop flame. I also reconnected with people I'd let drift. A friend from college who ran a book club. An old coworker who taught photography. These weren't distractions. They were reminders that there was still life beyond the title of dad. And then one day, out of nowhere, Sienna called. Not a text. Not a voicemail. A real call. I let it go to voicemail, listened later while slicing tomatoes. Hey, she said, voice softer than I remembered. I've been thinking. A lot. About everything. I'd like to talk, if you're willing. I'm not asking for money. Just time. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was relieved, like maybe the door hadn't slammed shut forever. Another part of me flinched, wondering if this was just another turn in the cycle. A wave of guilt followed. And then, right behind it, a firm, still voice I'd only recently begun to trust. You don't owe her access just because she asks for it. We agreed to meet at a local cafe. Neutral territory. I wore a soft gray button-up and arrived early, as I always did. She walked in a few minutes after the hour, wearing a denim jacket over a summer dress, her hair pulled back the way she used to in high school. Hi, Dad. Hi, Sienna. She sat across from me, hands wrapped around her cup like she was grounding herself. For a long moment, she just stared. Then, quietly, she said, You really hurt me. I didn't flinch. You hurt me too. She nodded, like she'd been expecting that. I didn't think it would blow up like that. I thought you'd understand. You excluded me, I said gently, from a night that symbolized everything I'd spent my life preparing you for. And you expected me to stay silent and keep giving. I wasn't trying to punish you, she said, tears beginning to form. I just thought it would be less stressful. For who? She wiped her cheek. I don't know anymore. There was no big breakthrough. No violins or sudden hugs. Just two people sitting across from years of miscommunication and unmet expectations. But it was honest. Before we parted, she asked, Do you think we'll ever get back to how it was? I shook my head. I hope not, because how it was hurt both of us. She nodded, a strange mix of sadness and respect in her eyes. We stood, hugged briefly, then went our separate ways. As I walked back to my car, I thought about all the years I spent trying to prove my worth through sacrifice. As if love needed to be earned over and over again. But it didn't. Not anymore. I had finally learned that being left off the guest list wasn't the tragedy I thought it was. It was an invitation to start choosing who belonged on mine. If this story moved you or made you reflect on your own family dynamics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. We tell real, raw stories about love, betrayal, and boundaries, and your engagement helps keep them coming. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the hardest thing to do is the healthiest. See you soon in the next story.